Yes, welcome one and all to the Atypical Life YouTube channel. I'm here today with Waris Hussein and I'm joined by Hadley. So yes, very big hello to you, sir.
Now you've done with the formalities. How are you doing, Waris?
I'm doing okay, thank you. I'm glad to be here because I was wondering where we were going to go with this technology. Yeah. Don't forget, I'm an oldie. I like to communicate in other.
Of course.
I'm a novice on this kind of communication, but here I am anyway.
Oh, if it was up to us, we'd love to do this in person. We'd love to do all of these in person, actually. Far more organic experience than otherwise talking to a computer screen.
Absolutely. There's
So are you going to ask me some things, or how are we going to kick this interview off? I mean, how are we going to start off with this?
I believe we've got a few questions prepared, but we were going to like slip them in naturally. It's kind of we wanted more of a generic chat with you as opposed to just a quite sterile Q&A setup.
Right.
Absolutely. Like I say, we've got some things noted down, like little tidbits and facts and things of that nature, and we can just sort of go roughly off them, but anything that gets said, you know?
I think we just kind of want to start off with saying, like, thank you so much for coming down and agreeing to doing an interview. I mean, this is like kind of, I mean, I'm kind of fanboying a bit right now. For me, Josh is different. Josh is into all wakes of Doctor Who, whereas my favorite period of it is very, very much the early stuff. I know I'm quite minority these days with having that interest, but my interest in the show is by far like Hartnell. And I think my latest, like my most recent Doctor, the one where I kind of, you know, my interest swings a bit, is John Pertwee. That's like as late into it as I go. Wow. So for me, this is totally awesome to get a chance to talk to.
You know, we as I think I mentioned to Josh when we were talking originally about this, don't forget it was a very long time ago that I was involved. In my head, it was only like yesterday. But the reality is that between then and now and what I'm perceiving in myself is that a huge amount has happened. And the show that started in a very humble way, and I've already made a lot of remarks about that, to what it's become today, which is gargantuan and actually is the kind of golden goose for the BBC. I wish I could partake of some of those financial riches and rewards. But the fact is, when I started, I was a very young person, and I've already made a lot of remarks about how happy I was that to be involved. But the actual mechanics of putting that show together have not been explored really. A bit of that was done by Mark Gatiss when he dramatized for the television drama of Adventure in Space.
That was something that we wanted to ask you about at some point.
As you realize, I was portrayed, I think quite beautifully actually, by Sacha Dhawan. But the reality is that even that euphemized my participation. In the drama, it looked as if I was already an established, well thought of, well sought after director who was being given this as a kind of, do us a favor, Waris. That's not the case. I was actually allotted this way down the line when it had been rejected by somebody else, a much more prominent drama director at the time. And the reality is that when I was given this, nobody knew what they were up to. The chaos of the creation of this project was enormous. And actually, I used to keep a diary in those days. I don't now, but I was actually looking at the day by day occurrences in the making of this program. And what I've began to realize is that actually, far from being a lucky guy to be assigned this, I was probably partaking of the poison chalice at the time. Nobody knew where this thing was going. There was a kind of uncertainty. Verity Lambert had been brought in, and I think a lot of people know about that. She was the first female drama director, producer in the drama department, television-wise. There were a lot of females involved elsewhere in radio, but not in television drama. So she already had to put up with all sorts of prejudices regarding a female involved on something like this. The creator was Sidney Newman, who was a Canadian, and a lot of people were looking at him askance because they were suspicious of his credentials, even though he'd done so well at ABC television, from which he had been brought over by the people above there. So, you know, the reality is that now we had a Canadian head of drama who was still finding his feet, who, by the way, created this idea of Doctor Who and never been given credit for it. He should be, like a lot of other shows now. If you talk about Coronation Street or even EastEnders,
if you see Star Trek, it says created by Gene Roddenberry.
Sydney's not even mentioned. Anyway, he created this, and it was his attempt to be original in a very conventional atmosphere. The BBC at that time was very conservative. It had its own rules. The kind of people employed were very stuffy, kind of tweed wearing, corduroy trousered, old school tie types, all of them male. Now imagine someone like myself entering this forum, 20 something years old, British Asian, talking with a posh accent, totally new to the whole fabric of the way this thing worked. They had actually taken me on because I'd gone through a series of very multiple interviews to get the job. And I was lucky to get it because it was quite difficult to get onto the trainee course. And anyway, I got in there. And then I suspect they didn't know what to do with me. And I was wondering about flipping from one thing to another, including a daytime soap, which at that time was very popular, called Compact. There weren't many soaps on in those days, so this was very important for the viewing public, for them to see these kind of shows. It's about a woman's magazine show. It's called Compact.
We know
I
Compact.
got my... I really learned a lot on that because of working, you know, everything was shot in the studio with 4 cameras continuously. Now that actually is an art, which I won't go into right now, but it's quite complex, and you have to defeat that whole process of complications involving cameras, cables on studios, studio spaces, the use of sets, which are designed specially on 3 sides in order to allow access for cameras. I mean, it is almost a mathematical process in how you actually work out how you're going to get your actors to go on the set and actually say their lines in some kind of pictorial context. And I was a very ambitious, visualized person because I grew up looking at movies and also dramas that ABC television used to do brilliantly. There were wonderful directors there, as opposed to the BBC, who were experimenting with these cameras in spite of the fact they were all cabled up and not single camera work. And so I used to try and copy or visualize how I could work my facilities with what I was offered. So when I was launched into this, I had no idea that we would end up in probably the worst studio they could have given us, which was in Lime Grove. It has now been demolished. Thank you. I'm very happy to know that's happened. But this was probably the arse end of the studio system, and we were given the most antique equipment. The cameras weighed a ton. The cameraman had to push to move forward or sideways. And my concept was to do both. And for them to follow my instructions was a very laborious process. And I insisted on trying something new, and I was creating potential havoc in my nervousness to succeed, because I wanted to impress. I'm simply giving you the background. So it wasn't all wonderful. Today, it's nostalgic. I'm asked to talk about it, and it's all surrounded by a golden glow. But the reality is that this show started off with practically no budget, with very few facilities. The equipment was antique. We were not at the splendid then new television center where all the high-end dramas were being made, which was in those days considered very sleek. And actually to this day, when you look at the exterior, you see what a marvel that place is, that oval-faced building. And it's still functioning. But we were not given that privilege because nobody knew what they had in their hands. So I want to preface all this by telling you, so that I'm not one of these nostalgia freaks about Doctor Who. I'm very happy that people are now in awe of it. And therefore, I'm here talking to you as a result. But it was not a labor of love. That's my point of view. And I want to also emphasize, it all sounds wonderful because myself and Verity and Sydney were all outsiders. He was a Canadian, she was a female, I was Indian. I actually used to joke and say we were like the Three Musketeers. And somehow we were fighting the system to survive. And of course, I was also living under the shadow, the sword of Damocles, that I was only contracted for 1 year. My contract was due to end at the end of the year that I was doing Doctor Who. And of course, I was terrified that if I made a mess of it, they'd just kick me out because they had no reason to keep me on. But that didn't happen ultimately. But the point is this, that at that time I was a bag of nerves, to be honest, trying to use my ingenuity as much as possible. And it's amazing to think that the thing survived. And don't forget, the first 4 episodes were not the most beautifully scripted in the world when you're dealing with cavemen and people in skins trying to create fire. The reality of that was, how could I make it truthful and not laughable? I mean, this could easily have ended up as a farce. A lot of men running around monosyllabically uttering words. These weren't the Flintstones. This was meant to be something serious. At least that's what I said to the cast. I mean, I was lucky to get the kind of actors who to take part, because a lot of them would have simply said, this is thanks very much, but I don't think I want to go running around in skins. But the fact is, I was lucky in the kind of people I got. Derek Newark being John, that kind of actor caliber. So we just put it together, and I had a chat with everybody saying, look guys, we're jumping in at the deep end. You've got to play this as seriously as you possibly can, and wherever we can emphasize the jeopardy or the danger to our quartet of main characters, if we can emphasize that in some way, you in your performance and me in the way I shoot it, and don't take it too lightly. Just take it as if it's happening for you seriously as much as possible. And I think that's what got us through, actually. The reality is that the show actually took off after the first 4 when the Daleks came in. And I was not involved with the Daleks. I wish I had been, but I can't claim that. But I can say that we actually led the way into the Daleks.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the way it's definitely sounding is, between the 3 of you, Doctor Who kind of started as the project that they kind of put all the oddballs on, where they didn't really know what to do with anyone else, and it sounds anyway like it was kind of like an underdog rising to the thing. I don't know,
to the top of a challenge, right?
rising to the top of the challenge, where they kind of didn't know what to do with you guys, and it actually ended up being, I mean, nowadays Doctor Who is one of the headlining properties belonged by the BBC. Yeah. So you really kind of stuck it to them there by doing your job well.
Well, I've got the original announcements for the show, which was in the Radio Times, trying to explain what this was about. And by the time we got to do the Marco Polos, which was 7 episodes, I did 6 of the 7. We'd already established ourselves, and the show was a huge hit. And to prove that, the Radio Times actually gave us a cover, which is highly sought after in those days.
This is the one of
suddenly we were what?
So sorry. This is the one of Mr. Hartnell and the Marco Polo actor whose name I cannot remember.
Yes, Mark Eden.
Yes,
it was Mark Eden and Darren Nesbitt, and then our quartet. But Mark Eden, I think, and William Hartnell on the cover with Darren Nesbitt. Not even the quartet. It was for us. This was an achievement, which meant that we had now reached a point where the public were going to be told that they were happy with the Radio Times as a more or less telling the world that we'd arrived. But the reality of it was it was quite a long journey. And that didn't end, by the way. You would have thought that we'd be whisked off to the television center and be given a lot of facilities that we still didn't have. I had to shoot stuff like sandstorms and desert scenes at Studio H Lime Grove. I mean, nothing was changed. I was still offered the same very ramshackle facilities to create this epic journey to
an entire journey across all of ancient China, shot in Lime Grove Studios. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think we did one day of shooting the Ghana fight with Marco. There's a sword fight. And I said, there's no way I can shoot this on 4 cameras and have it happen as it goes, as it's recorded. So we did pre-record. I think we went to Ealing Studios and shot the actual sword fight. And I think we also shot a sequence with a caravan with going across the desert, which we couldn't have possibly done at the studio. But we had to simulate things like sandstorms in Studio H Lime Grove.
It seems to be a very visually appealing. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, myself and Josh have only been able to. I've listened to the audio. I believe you've watched the Telsnap reconstruction, but it looks a very visually interesting. I think that's one episode where we could really have benefited from actually being able to physically see how a lot of the stuff was done, because it sounds wonderful with audio. You can definitely picture it being set across the sprawling deserts, and from the pictures it seems to hold up to that.
I mean, there are photographs that now are evidence of what we did. Unfortunately, as you realize, the actual program has disappeared and it's not available for viewing. It's very sad, because the difference between the first 4, which, as you can appreciate, the way we worked, everything had become far more fluid and more elaborate. And the final sequence that we did, where they arrive in Cathay or Beijing and Peking or wherever it was supposed to be, was spectacular. The sets, I have to tell you, because the budget had increased. And I had a wonderful designer by then called Barry Newbury. So we're talking about Doctor Who, but I would like to emphasize, I know that you're much more interested in talking about that particular program, but I think I said to Josh, I've talked a lot about this.
Yes.
And a lot of people are going to say, oh, if they're interested, they're going to say, but haven't we heard all this before? And I've been asked to go to conventions to talk about it, partly because I was the original director. Otherwise, as you will appreciate, not many directors, unless they're Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese, are known for their work. I know that's feature films and mine is television, but I still maintain that this is an important part of our culture, and I'm a part of it. I've been to conventions where people have thanked me for having created the show which they now admired. And I'm flattered by that sort of observation. But it's only a part of my heritage. It jump-started my career, and for that I'm grateful. Without that, I don't think I would have seen my future as it is now, happened to be. But I would like to emphasize again the unusual aspects of my participation, because in retrospect, I actually am not happy about some of the way I was treated. I've never discussed that before. Right. Nowadays, we're talking about all sorts of aspects of people in society, and television is very aware of casting as much as possible with diversity. Diversity is now a big word.
Of course.
It's almost like it's almost compulsory. You have to understand that my situation was not the same at all. And diversity wasn't even a word.
It's encouraged these days, whereas you kind of fought to get where you were back then.
Yeah. But then it wasn't. And it was like climbing a mountain. And in retrospect, I wonder at myself, because I know what I was trying to do. I was trying to work myself into the system. But when you're in such a minority, which I was, you've got to put extra effort. You've got to go more than 100%. You've got to go 500%, because any slip you make is regarded as a fall. It's not a stumble. Coming onto the set, being looked at by a lot of guys, wondering who the heck is this kid? And then on top of that, the ethnicity is a part of it.
They're kind of waiting for you to fail.
It's not an easy thing to talk about.
Of course.
Because in the end, one is being a little brown Englishman. You know, one is not being oneself. Because I'm trying to hold my own against latent prejudices. And believe me, there were such things. Quiet, unspoken, questioning, who is this guy and is he capable? That was behind me in my head.
And this was, of course, the context of the 60s, wasn't it? So we can only imagine what the climate was like in Britain in the 1960s, you know.
Today, it's a given. People don't even discuss it unless they're yobbos fighting and beating people up after a football match. You know what I'm saying? That's the worst element of society today. But then it was a given. The atmosphere in England was fraught with prejudice. We just had Enoch Powell talking about rivers of blood because of immigration. And I'll share with you, this was done as a joke. It wasn't done as an insult. A member of my crew who was responsible for my instructions, he was on the floor, I was in the control room. I was hesitating and taking a long time to make certain decisions. And we had a jokey relationship, so I can preface that by telling you the story. But because I was taking too much time, and time is money, and I needed to move on, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was dithering. And he said, "Waris, for God's sake, get your ass off this, because otherwise we're going to send you back on the next boat."
I shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's the gall.
Now that was a joke. That was a friendly joke.
That was a friend saying a joke.
A friend telling me
different context.
In joking terms. I mean, we'd buy each other a drink afterwards. But can you understand what the psychology of that remark was?
Of course.
You're still today. His Indian friend in your head.
Yes, exactly.
His Indian friend, which is a different category to his friend.
Yeah, but still the psychology of it's there. It's like the way women were treated. I mean, women today are on the march. In those days, they had a second. They were secondary.
That's
And
exactly
so
it.
what I'm saying is, I was toiling away to make my presence felt in this atmosphere. That doesn't exist anymore. Or if it does, it's not allowed to.
Yeah.
You know. So I wanted to make that point, and I haven't made it before ever in my interviews. But I'm beginning to do that now because this whole idea of diversity and Black Lives Matter and everything else. And then I think to myself, hey, wait a minute. I was at the forefront of all this.
Yeah.
and I've almost been forgotten on the basis of that. I will tell you that I shouldn't be complaining, because the BFI, I don't know whether you know this, but they gave me a wonderful month 2 years ago at the National Film Theatre, showing my best of my television work, which is still around.
I wasn't aware of
a
that.
lot of it has been wiped, I must tell you, because subsequent to this, I went into what was then the high end of BBC drama, golden days, golden years.
Yeah.
Of the Wednesday play and the play for today.
That's right.
Play and the play of the month. These were dramas, either classic dramas or new ones written by up-and-coming playwrights. And on a Wednesday night, an audience which could not afford to go to the theatre, because theatre has always been expensive for most pockets.
Yeah.
They looked forward to a Wednesday night play, and it wasn't done as a stage thing. We shot it like films, and I was involved in the creation of at least 3 of a writer called Simon Gray, who subsequently became a huge playwright and very highly thought of. I started working with him as a director, and he was a novice as well. So I've had the privilege of starting with people at the beginning of my career, at the beginning of their careers. And this was at a time when drama, which today people, I wish they could be treated to a season of the shows that we did. But unfortunately, the BBC in its wisdom wiped a majority of those dramas because they were shot on tape, and they were saving money on tapes. It's unheard of. If I could give you a list of the shows I've done which were wiped, and I was sitting down the other day because the BFI actually sent me a list of my work. They've been very good with me, and do you know, I did up to, and that's subsequently accounting works in my life in America as well. I've done over 100 productions. And at the BBC, when I was there doing dramas, the Wednesday play, I was doing up to 3 a year.
Wow.
And these were 75-minute dramas.
Yeah.
So it's no mean feat. But at least what I had achieved through Doctor Who, and that's why I give credit to the show, even though I'm telling you the circumstances under which it was created, I ended up on some very high-end productions for which I'm very grateful, which helped me in my career. And, you know, so we could go on about that forever, but that's how my life started. And that's why I'm here talking to you about what I've done. I mean, if there's anything else you'd like to ask me other than or about, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to very briefly mention one detail that we saw in An Adventure in Space and Time. I just wanted to see what the truth was to this and clear it up. There's in the scene where Verity Lambert tries to convince William Hartnell to be the Doctor. You're there, Waris Hussein is there. Is there truth to that? Were you privy to the casting of the first Doctor?
Yes.
Fantastic.
That's exactly what happened. Mark Gatiss did a lot of research when he was writing the screenplay, and I really admired the way he approached it, because there was the idea of making a drama about the making of Doctor Who, and we didn't want it to be like they'd done a drama about the creation of Coronation Street at ITV, and it was all about how it came about, and it was all about people in boardrooms talking about it. But what happened with Mark was he dramatized it, and he chose to focus on William Hartnell and his involvement with the Doctor Who situation. So with me, it was in the drama, I sort of, as I said earlier, I've sort of established as already being at the Beeb and in quite a good position. But actually, that was not the case. But I was able to help Mark in certain details about what actually took place. What he had got right was the business of casting. Verity and I sat and had to think of who we wanted to play, and she had thought of various other actors. But William Hartnell was the one she focused on. And at that time, he had not made any television at all. He'd done a lot of feature films playing sort of secondary lead roles. He was well known for that, a classic being Brighton Rock, I think, was one of them. But anyway, to persuade someone like this to do this, which was a series, in itself took a bit of doing. And I was a part of that casting process with Verity. And as in the drama, we did, that's exactly what happened. We went and had dinner, and the man was watching us with a beady eye, wondering what the heck. There's this woman opposite me and this Indian, and what am I saying yes to? I mean, it's a comedy in a funny way, and we were in a Chinese restaurant. I think he was even puzzled by the food he was eating, because he was a very the thing about William Hartnell, he was dyed in the wool Brit. I mean, it's a Second World War stalwart, you know. He stood up with and fought for the country, and that was England to him. Suddenly being given this opportunity to work with these odd people was an exercise for him, but he resolved it, fortunately. So the casting was very much on our part, and we were lucky to get the people we got. I mean, don't forget that William Russell had been established already in a TV series, I think, playing Lancelot. It was a series, some medieval drama, and so you know. But we were there, and I was in on it, and very much a part of the creation of this show. That's why, unlike directors that follow, and in most dramas, unless it's a single drama, in most series, the directors were many, and he is therefore part of a system, and there's no individual vision on his part. He becomes amalgamated with the show. I mean, today you cannot possibly name any of the people involved on successful series, you know, such as these hospital dramas, Holby City, or whatever. The shows themselves have a lot of visual impact to the audience, but no one can remember directors. We just come and go. We're anonymous.
Of course.
Unless you have very obscure interests like me and Josh, where we're willing to hunt down a director from a TV show that was nearly 60 years old.
Yes.
So leading on from when we were talking about when you first got into directing, you were first Asian British director, of course. How, speaking in terms of you know, representation and acceptance, how did that progress as you went along in your career as a director? Did you see more opportunities for people when as the years went on? How did it change as the years went on for you?
Well, you know, let's get into the idea of when I started and where we are today, because today a whole new generation of people are thinking in a totally different mindset to when I started. And I think it's important to know that, because there's a kind of nostalgia right now about the past, and with it goes the glamour of the success of Doctor Who, for instance, right? And that's fine, and I've more or less swum along with it. and enjoyed the kudos and the praise. But behind it, what I really find that I'd left behind, and possibly I shouldn't resurrect, but we're talking about it, was that it was a very hard swim against the current. And I was putting up with a lot of implicit self-doubt, that myself was surrounded by what concerned me was the basic, not antagonistic, but critical atmosphere that had launched me into this particular position. I was very privileged to have been given the training by the BBC. I was aware that I was the very first person to be doing this from my ethnic background. I was very proud of it, as was my family. So the whole sort of glow of it seemed to be terrific around us. Internally, and the practicality of it was quite different, because actually each episode that I directed was fraught with all sorts of dangers and objects, physical as well as mental. I already, I think, mentioned the circumstances under which Doctor Who was made. In very lean budgets, at a studio that was totally inadequate, with equipment that was antique. It was a real challenge where people basically were asking me to prove myself. And in order to do that, and we're talking about the first 4 episodes of a script that I had no faith in to start with, then followed by 7 episodes of Marco Polo, which we have to agree was done under much more sympathetic circumstances, because by now the show was a hit. But the hit came as a result of a lot of pain. And so I don't want to go on being glowing in my nostalgia. I want to now, at this stage, and I've not really done it before, I've always basked in the glow of nostalgia. People have always asked me, what does it feel like? How do you feel? And I say, I feel great. But the reality is, I'm now talking about the actual mechanics of putting that show together, which were actually beyond horrendous. And people have forgotten about it. Why not? Time's gone by. However, here am I, and I've used that metaphor like I give birth and the child is taken away and grows elsewhere. So the adult now thanks me, but has moved on. I'm now possibly even the grandparent. But as a grandparent, I'm aging myself, but the reality is I feel kind of bittersweet. And I want people to know that, because in this day and age where everybody thinks that we're now in a multicultural society, I'm sorry to say that as we speak, things have happened recently which people should be ashamed of. And we're now talking about Black Lives Matter, but racism is still rampant under the surface. And, you know, however successful we are, and let's face it, there are many more South Asians from my part of the world doing very well successfully in both the media and the law and finance. There's still that degree of doubt that underlies their successes. And I'm sorry, I don't care who they are, and we all know who they are operating under the vigilant eye of criticism. And that goes from the highest to the lowest. And I am actually very critical of some of the people in authority from my part of the world who actually seem to be disguising their own insecurities. And I'm now aware that I want to talk about that basically because, you know, it's all very well being some kind of vague legend now and no longer on the surface of it all. In fact, a lot of people don't even know who the heck I am in terms of Doctor Who. The fans do. There are many people who read and they follow. But I'm now talking about my wider career. I'm not just talking about doctoring. That launched my career, by the way, and I'm very grateful for that. Never going to say anything about that. I'm also grateful for what I got from it, the BBC. I'm very grateful. I'm very loyal to the BBC, in spite of my being critical. And I think one has a right to criticize the very people that educated one.
Of course.
And so I'm grateful for all those things, but I'm sorry to say that things have not changed that much in terms of perception. That's why we see ourselves where we are today. I suspect that's why Brexit happened. It's got nothing to do with economics.
Yeah.
And that bothers me. And the underlying privilege of the people giving us the orders today, especially at a time of pandemic and the chaos that's ensuing, makes me feel yet again that I have to say what was the real thing, and let's take the tarnish, let's take the glitter off the actual ball, and let's look at what actually exists. So that's where I'm coming from. But again, a lot of people might say, well, goodness me, why are you complaining? You're far better off than a lot of us. And I can agree. I am better off than a lot of my compatriots. But I have to make a statement, and that's what I'm doing now at this moment.
That's good. And considering it's been, what, about 50, nearly 60 years, and this is the first time that you can mention it, it says a lot about the development of the world.
I've never really talked about this aspect of my career trajectory. I have to say that a lot has been good. I would also say, interesting enough, that my career took off to the point where I was invited to go to America. I didn't go there seeking my fortune, but I was asked to go. And over there, interesting enough, I was treated in a totally different way. I was introduced as a British Indian director, but the British was very prominent in their reference to me. However, interesting enough, again, through the early years, things were going swimmingly until there was a situation which occurred, i.e. Iraq and Saddam Hussein. And my name, as you can say, stopped helping my career trajectory.
Took me a second.
The mood of people over there turned as well. So from being a British Indian and given a lot of credit for what I was doing, there was another hill to be climbed from my part, partly because the name put me into a whole different category, which is interesting because I never thought of it that way. But Americans tend to have an enemy. And in this case, it turned itself towards the Middle East and what happened then. So in a funny way, my career was jolted in its progression, but it wasn't stalled until 9/11. And that's when it really came into a crashing halt. In fact, I was in Toronto shooting a movie for television. We were actually wrecking for locations when we heard about the Twin Towers. And it was interesting because the horror of it was, of course, enveloped all of us. We somehow managed to struggle through the production. At that time, things stopped literally. There was no communication between. I was shooting in Canada, by the way. That I would make that point. We were in Toronto and simulating, pretending it was the United States, which is what often happens. A lot of production companies go up to Canada and pretend it's America. And so I was shooting America in Canada. Then this disaster. So then we had to go back across the border. And it was interesting because you actually cross the border in Toronto to get into the States. There's an immigration situation. And I was just trying to get on and finish the work after this whole horror. And then one of the actors said to me, "Are you going to be all right going back in?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Listen, I think we're going to have to help you." So one of the leading actresses, who was actually very well known, went up to the head of the immigration department, US part, and said, would you be very nice to our director who was coming through in view of what's happened? He's an incredibly talented guy and we all love him. Please give him as much of a welcome as you can. And, you know, at the time I thought, oh, how very nice. But in fact, she facilitated something that could have been serious.
Well-meaning, but
well-meaning, but it had a significance.
Yeah.
The fact that she, and of course, but by the time I went through, they were all welcoming me with open arms because of her reputation. The movie, she was a well-known star, so television star. So she got me in without any aggravation. But do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
My life has been circumscribed by certain circumstances. And I am now fully aware of it. I'm not complaining, but I'm explaining. A lot of people probably say, well, what about happens to be if you're black or you're Jewish? And there's a lot of prejudice against all sorts of people, you know? But it's the silent prejudice that you can't fight.
Yeah.
And all I can tell you is that after 9/11, my job offers literally started to dry up in America.
Wow.
And actually, I was fortunate enough to have people who actually knew me. I ended up actually picked up by a friend of mine who was the head of film department in the Academy of Art in San Francisco, teaching film students. And for 4 or 5 years, I actually ended up teaching film students up in San Francisco about filmmaking. So my career kept going, but if you can imagine what one has to deal with in these circumstances, and I'm fortunate enough to have done enough so that, you know, I can still say I'm waving, not drowning.
Yeah. Very quickly then, how was it teaching? Just as a quick little dovetail, did you enjoy it for those years?
Did I enjoy what? Sorry?
Teaching, sorry.
Teaching. Yes, I'm not a trained teacher. So I was employed basically on my experience and work I'd done and people who knew my work. I found it absolutely fantastic. I mean, what happened was you'd have a class of maybe 10 students per session. Most of them had been trained in film school in other areas of it, you know, all sorts of areas. Actually, they knew more than I could have instructed them in. My job was to instruct them and work with them in performance and direction in front of cameras. So what does it mean to work in front of a camera? How does that intimacy involve you in terms of performance? How do you prepare for it? How do you shoot it in the most economic way? Don't waste time. Time is money. I mean, all the things that work on film and then the budgetary considerations. But the actual purpose of my being there was to then find out who possibly had the talent. And let's face it, when you've got groups of 10, your experience tells you who's actually going to be successful and those who unfortunately are going to fall by the wayside. But you can't tell them that. You've got to treat each one of them equally and try and help them implicitly, you know, your experience tells you. And the one thing I used to do, because we were up in San Francisco, I'd say to them, now, what do you want to do with your lives when you graduate? Well, we want to direct, we want to act. Yeah, but where? Well, we want to go down to Los Angeles. And I said, right, let me just say something to you guys. You ladies, you were probably told you were the local beauty queen in town. And that sent you off on your trajectory. You came to San Francisco because you had to deal with other things academically. But it's all very well being a beauty queen in your small town. You have to have something very special as an actress or as a person, because when you go down, you will see in LA that there are more than 100 of you, all competing for the same part. And if you haven't got that something special, be prepared for what ensues, because that is a town which rejects very quickly. I used to give them this without frightening them, but they were hopefully adult enough to know what I was talking about. So, but for me, the best part of it was when we do scenes, by the way, we do scenes from well-known projects. I mean, I'd say things like, we're going to do a scene from Days of Wine and Roses. Now, I don't want you guys to go and look at the original film. I want you to look at the script. In the script, the woman is a reformed alcoholic, as was her husband. Their marriage split up. And then the scene is all about them trying to get together again. And then I turned to one of them and said, how old are you? And she'd say, well, I'm 22. I say, right, the character's 35. Do you know what it means to be 35? Well, I don't know. Well, then go and think about it. Think about people who know that age group and let me know, because then I'll be able to tell you whether you're mature enough to play the role. You see what I'm saying? I'm getting things from people. That's my job as a film person, as a teacher, as someone who communicates. And I'm happy to say that particular scene that I've just mentioned was probably one of the best I actually ended up directing with these two. The couple really got it. They just nailed it. And this woman, the actress herself, I think was actually about 25, 26, but she got it. Yeah. So, you know, sometimes it didn't happen. Sometimes, you know, you can't be Stanley Kowalski to Blanche Dubois. Sometimes it's way beyond you. And I wouldn't have tried that scene anyway. It would have been too difficult. But that was my job as a teacher up in San Francisco, and I had a really good time. And it kept my creative wheels oiled. So it means that I'm still capable, and I'm still actually developing screenplays with producers, but we're dealing with something else now, and that is rampant ageism.
Yes.
I mean, the reality is, when you're my age, why aren't I sitting looking at the sunset on a Florida beach in a wheelchair? But the fact is, I'm not doing that, and I'm still, you know, able to present myself if I'm given the opportunity. So, you know, I'm very fortunate in that respect, and I've been able to keep myself occupied. I developed screenplays with my producers in LA, who still have some kind of faith in me, but we've got to find finance. Now, the current thing with the pandemic and everything else that's stopping and starting things. Yeah. The biggest and most common denominator is who is a star that you've got in your project. If you get a name, if I got Meryl Streep, I could get the phone book financed. Yeah. She just has to read it. So unfortunately, I don't know her, so I can't offer it to her. But I know one or two prominent guys over here in England, but even they are choosy because they're in demand. And if I send my script along with 20 others, however much they like me and we have a great time having dinners and socializing, they can still turn to me and say, Waris, we would love to work with you, but unfortunately, this is not for us. And that is unfortunately what we're having to do with. You just got to, it's a crapshoot. Yeah. So this business, that's something else that I have to say, I'm very, not cynical, but I smile at, is fame. You know, if I did something outrageous and it hit the headlines, then I would be noticed. If I keep quiet, I don't think, a lot of my friends say to me, you don't push yourself enough. Well, that's not in my nature. I come from a part of India, by the way, which is, it's legendary, where we used to say you first at the door and never got through it. So that's my part of India. There are other parts of India where you find a lot of the British Asians come from, which is quite different. It's the Punjabi element. And you'll notice that a lot of Punjabis in the media, their psyche is dictated from much more. They do go through the door, and they probably go ahead of the person they're inviting, actually. And India is a vast subcontinent, which is something else people forget. I can't even understand Punjabi because my language where I was brought up was Hindi and Urdu. So, culturally, there's a lot going on. I'm a kind of concoction, really, of many ingredients. And out of that, here am I as a British Asian. I went through the entire public school system. I went to university, I went to Cambridge. So you can say, well, that's ace, and that, what are you complaining about? And I'm not. I'm privileged. A lot of people now criticize all that, but then don't forget we have a prime minister who went to Eton and Oxford, and I don't know whether that helps or not. So I don't know whether privilege is good or not, but some people have to struggle to find their feet, and they do brilliantly, but others have somehow managed to get through it all, and that's what I think I've done, and that's why I'm talking to you. But the jumping off point again was Doctor Who. But I want to make it very clear that Doctor Who is not the be all and end all of my life.
Absolutely.
Although I love going to conventions and people ask me to go here, there, and everywhere. I go from the biggest ones in America to the smallest ones here in England. In fact, I'm going in about a week or so to somewhere in Chiswick.
Oh, really?
Now, you may say, why? And I say, well, because there are a group of people there who are fans. And if they get some kind of pleasure about my stories, by the way, I don't sit there to tell them the kind of things I'm telling you. I just tell them about all the brilliant things that happen. The achievements, really. And it was an achievement. But it took some doing. The mechanics of it are what we're talking about. The surface it glitters. It's great, why not? But I think it's time now that I spoke about the interior workings and the background of a show that was created. And a lot of people just don't know that, or if they don't, why should they? It is how many years old, but things start somewhere, don't they? They don't just happen.
Humble beginnings.
I can be forgiven sometimes for being rather cynical about some people who were involved in that show, who I felt didn't deserve to be there or almost killed it. But then there are wonderful people who I admire tremendously, like Russell T. Davies, who gave it a huge, he injected a new life into it because he was actually a huge fan. We know that. And I had the privilege of meeting him at one of these conventions. I'd never met him before. But what was so thrilling for me was that I didn't have to introduce myself. The moment he came up, he just came up to me in the most affectionate way and said, look, I just want to let you know how much I admire you. And I said, oh my God, Russell, you it's the other way around. He said, no, I'm trying to explain to you. He said, I cannot stop watching the first few episodes. And the very first episode, which I'm still bewildered by, but they keep saying, it's incredible. And I said, well, if you think so, I'm certainly not going to argue about it. So there are pleasures in all this, the rewards are there, but you have to find them.
Oh, absolutely. So this isn't the last thing I want to ask about Doctor Who, if that's okay, but was there ever any interest in you going back to direct anything? Be it with the new series, be it maybe in the 80s, 70s?
Yeah, wasn't there?
Well, not recently. No, not since it was taken over by the current people. It was totally, I think they totally took over, didn't they, and changed it all, especially with introducing a totally new character in the way of a female Doctor Who. There was a time when I would have loved to have gone back, and unfortunately I wasn't invited. Maybe I didn't make enough of an effort. Maybe I should have written a letter, because interesting enough, I did go to Cardiff once to visit, and they gave me a royal welcome. I'm really thrilled because they all kind of stopped and this is Waris, and Peter Capaldi was then appearing, and I loved him. I thought he was so good as Doctor Who. Now there's a lot of controversy because we'd had our glamorous intermediaries like Matt Smith and David. I mean, the point is, I'm not saying they shouldn't have been there, but the Capaldi character to me resonated much more in its eccentricity to William Hartnell, and that was what I considered was the original Doctor Who. But anyway, so Peter was there, and I was taken on set, and it was lovely. And then seeing this huge set for the interior of the TARDIS, I couldn't help laughing. I mean, I'd seen it on screen, but the actual physicality of it, I thought, my God, when we started off, you know, with a hexagonal and
it was the print on the blanket.
Yeah. So anyway, having seen and then I met this director, was a young lady and a young woman, and she was, I think she was American, but she said to me, you know, I actually fought to get here. She said, I wrote endless letters saying, I'm a film graduate, I've done this, that, please consider me for directing. And obviously it resonated, and they were using her, and she was working on it. So I kept thinking, well, I'm a bit late now. Maybe I should have been writing pleading letters as well. But I didn't quite get round to that. But no, I would have loved to have gone back, but I wasn't asked. So that's the answer.
Absolutely. The reason
I think especially, so sorry, I think especially now when they're focusing a lot more of the nostalgia of the very early show, I don't think it would be that difficult at all for you to just slip right back in there. I'd watch the hell out of that. That's all I'm saying.
No, well, look, I mean, I don't know. It's going through all sorts of permutations from what I gather at the moment. Nothing's been resolved. They're still talking about whether, you know, they're going to change the cast and how it's going to be done. For me, to be honest, when it got to the point where the current lot, where the main character then had 4 companions, and it just literally it dissolved the concentration, because how do you deal with 4 separate characters? The whole point was someone who knows or thinks that the mystery factor has somebody who's trying desperately to keep up and find out how to survive next to this incredibly eccentric, inhuman person. That seemed to get lost. So 4 people are now running around in jeopardy, but is that what the concept really was? That's my question. The original
so sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I love the dynamic between Susan E. and Barbara and the Docs, and I've always felt that Doctor Who, like the character of Doctor Who and the TARDIS by extension, should only be a device for the storytelling element. Like the episode only really begins when the TARDIS opens and they leave, as opposed to the kind of the prolonged character drama that they have a lot of in the new series.
Yes. It would have been more concentrated if you'd had just 2 people in conflict with each other, or trying to survive with each other. I mean, that was the original concept. And of course, in my original days, she was the granddaughter, for God's sake. I don't know what happened to her in the end. She got forgotten and lost in the story points. I always thought that maybe it might have been quite interesting if the resurrection of Doctor Who as a woman, that it could have been Susan, who was the granddaughter of the original. And that might have made sense, you see, but they never harked back to the original. I mean, why did they make her into a separate entity? There was no link. And it would have been great if she could have said, you know, I went through all this so many years ago.
That is
with my grandfather. And
I'm so sorry. That is so strange. I have been saying that for that exact argument. I said they would have got so much less controversy if, when the Doctor became a woman, they had retroactively swapped out for being. I have been saying that for years, and to hear that same argument come out of your mouth gives me so much validation.
You're glowing, aren't you?
The problem is that, you know, I've never pronounced on that, so you're probably hearing for the first time. The point about this is, you know, when you say things like that, people then start saying, oh, well, you know, we've moved on. And why are you referring to something that nobody knows anything about? Well, I find that a very frail argument, actually, because the whole of concept of Doctor Who is regeneration and continuity. And for me, I have to say that there was a lack of continuity as it continued. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
it
don't
could
get
have been
the bloody timeless child
it
nonsense.
could have been a sci-fi show without the name. It could have been something else.
Yeah.
Why not make it a totally different sci-fi adventure? Why use the name Doctor Who when it came from somewhere? I mean, this is where the Americans actually followed through with their Star Trek. You know what I mean? They brought in new generations, but they had links.
They kept very much that
They
spirit
were very
the same.
careful in their narrative as to how they continued the story to maintain the interest in their fans. At the point about fandom as such, people who are enthusiastic enough fans, the reason they stick with it is because they identify with certain aspects of what they're looking at. And there should be a kind of continuity. However much the stories change, however much we want to go off elsewhere. But I felt that was lacking, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the original concept kind of disappeared. And that's why I like Peter Capaldi so much. A lot of people said, oh, well, we miss Matt Smith. Yeah, Matt Smith was great, but he could have been the absent-minded professor in any drama.
Capaldi is far more akin to the earlier, same for me.
Capaldi's a very, very clever guy. He's a very good actor, and he stuck to his concept. He said, I don't want any sex between myself and my assistant. I don't want any reference to that. And he was absolutely right, because before that, there were all sorts of implications. And the cliche of that is that in most cliche dramas, you have two protagonists. You have a policeman and his assistant. He's a guy and she's a woman. You never quite know whether they're going to get together after they've solved the latest crime. That is the format. But that should not be the format in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
You should not
I agree
underscore it with potential sexuality, which is what happened in the David Tennant episodes.
Yeah. I feel Doctor Who in the modern years got far too... It drew too much attention to itself, with the Doctor being this big mysterious figure. As I said, it should really be a storytelling device to tell other stories. I think as soon as you start telling stories about the Doctor, you're answering questions that are better if it's kind of left unanswered.
Yes, I absolutely agree. All the externals that they have to deal with, the threats, the adventures, the ability to escape mortal combat, should still be external compared to what's going on inside him or her, which we do not ever understand. There should be a kind of mystery to that person.
Absolutely.
Very early on, the Doctor Who, when we had Bill Hartnell, we even made him into not only just an eccentric old man, but he was capable of violence to his own people, to the Barbara. And do you remember that sequence where he almost, in their escaping, he was willing to let them behind? Now, the point is this: that is not just an eccentric old man. That's a man who knows more than the mortals.
That's an alien.
If they've got to be sacrificed, so be it.
That's something.
You need to make him a dangerous person.
Capaldi got that, I think.
And you need to be able to find comfort in his presence, but also it should be an uneasy comfort.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Of course.
I love the idea of the Doctor as some almost eldritch god that could destroy a universe, the planet, if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. He's separate from the rest of his species.
I think you're giving him too much power. He is not able to exert it. Maybe what you're saying, he might want to. You know what I'm saying? He might be capable of it, but he is limited. And what is it that limits him? What is it that stops him that is beyond his own capabilities, which is the mystery? Who dominates him in moments of crisis if he could destroy the world? And they want to, but what is it that stops him? What is the other force? What is the mysterious force that's never explained? That is his frustration.
It's the timeless child.
It's a very interesting take, Waris, absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of what I'm trying to say is he should be a very complicated person.
Yes.
Not just able to bring out his instruments of power and wave a wand and hope for the best.
Yeah, no, completely.
Sonic wand, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Doctor. I feel like we'll talk to death about it, but we also alluded a lot to that you are a lot more than your work on Doctor Who. So I'd love to ask you, what is, if you were to say to someone, this is my best work, or this is my favorite piece of work, which would you point people to? What would you point people to? Sorry.
Well, you know something interesting. I cannot put my finger on one particular show. There's a reason for that, because in a funny way, I've been very privileged to have a huge spectrum of choices in the work I've done. So let me just explain this. I've managed to get a drama. I've won an Emmy, for instance, on, of all things, a musical, which I directed, of Barry Manilow's song Copacabana, which was based on the song.
Yeah.
Now, anyone who's a fan of Barry's and can sing the song knows what's it about. But it was scripted for him. He wrote original music for it. He wanted to do a sort of homage to the MGM musicals.
Right.
And it was set in the 40s, and the format was musical a la 40s with his music. So I directed it. I'd never directed a musical before. And guess what? I won an Emmy for it.
Wow.
Same time, I directed the abdication drama, Edward and Mrs Simpson, which has so many parallels to today in the sense that Royal married a twice divorced woman. And look at the results of that situation. We're now dealing with today and the past. And then when I won an Emmy for a BAFTA for that.
Yeah.
So those are my two crowning glories award-wise. I also did the very first British AIDS drama ever, when AIDS was not even thought of in this country except as a gay plague. In those days, anyone who had the disease, like today, it was a pandemic.
Yeah.
The younger generation today haven't a clue about what that meant, except that the targeted people were gay people, gay men. It was known as a gay disease, which is actually inaccurate because, as it proved historically, it spread through the world amongst not only gay people, but heterosexuals. It was a sexually transmitted illness and disease that killed people. That's been forgotten about because we now have all sorts of medication for it. As we now have vaccines today, we're hoping will cure us or save us from what's happening today with the virus. So I did the first ever the first AIDS drama, funnily enough, written by a woman who was very anti the idea that it was simply something that happened to men. Her story is about a heterosexual married man who contracts the illness by having sex with a high-class prostitute at a convention in New York. He's a businessman. Wow. He's English. He goes to convention in New York, celebrating a big deal. They bring in the women. He has sex with this woman, comes back, he's infected, and he catches the disease. So her writing, this woman wrote, she said, I wrote it at a time when nobody understood what that illness was really about. They were simply pointing the finger at men, gay men. So her script was innovative at the time. We have a scene in it where the doctor explains to the wife whose husband is now infected, that he has AIDS. And her first reaction is one not only of nausea and horror, but has he been having sex with men? She actually asks him, she says, have you been seeing men behind my back? And he says, what the hell are you talking about? He said, I screwed one woman, some whore back in New York. And so that was way ahead of its time. And we have a scene where the doctor's explaining what the transmission is all about. It's transmitted through liquids. It's not just by sitting on a toilet seat or touch. Because in those days, people were wearing masks when medical staff were putting trays under doors in isolation wards. It was that worrying.
Yeah.
It's so similar to today, except today is much more serious in a different way. So I'm very proud of having directed something that was so ahead of its time. And at that time I was directing it, literally it was a pandemic and people were dying.
Yeah.
Dying of it. And unfortunately it was mainly men before it spread through to the heterosexual community. So I'm very proud of that. I also directed some work in America, which I'm very proud of. I did a mini-series about the Vanderbilt custody case in the 1930s, where the very rich indulged in the most ridiculous court case, where the aunt of a Vanderbilt child, who was 9, was fighting for custody against the mother, who was considered profligate. And they were spending huge amounts of money from their luxury mansions, while people in the streets were starving. The contrast between indulging one's self against all odds. So I had the extraordinary experience of recreating this world of wealth versus what was the undercurrent. And the people in my cast were people like Betty Davis, who I had the privilege of working with. I'm very proud of having worked with some of the best actors in their profession. Christopher Plummer was another person in it. So, and Angela Lansbury. So, you know, that's, you asked me what I was proud of, so I'm giving you a kind of spectrum.
Absolutely.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
Good answer. Especially in light of recently of Jeffrey Bezos going to space while the rest of the world burns. I think that's quite relevant these days as well, actually.
Oh, absolutely. It's one rule for one and one rule for another, isn't it?
There you go.
Nice to know it never changes then. Well, nice.
Nothing really changes. We just keep going as long as somehow we survive, which, by the way, I think we ought to talk about the fact that it's not just we're destroying ourselves, it's actually Mother Nature's telling us a thing or two. Look at the catastrophes, the heat and fire on the west coast of America, the floods in Europe, places that never thought they'd be touched, like Germany and Belgium and now China. I mean, you know, the world is at the mercy of nature, not just of ourselves. It's all very well billionaires flying up and looking down at us, having spent fortunes, tell us that the earth is
if I might quote from one of my favorite Godzilla movies, the arrogance of man is thinking nature is in his control and not the other way around.
Perfect. Was that a quote from Doctor Who?
Godzilla,
no, where
actually.
From? Oh, sorry, my ignorance. What a brilliant statement. What a brilliant statement.
Absolutely.
No, I thought you were quoting something from a knowledgeable writer on Doctor Who, but I think that's way past that wisdom. Anyway.
Wow. But yes, from all that work you've done, you've won your awards and you've done all these things. Going back, you said you did the Wednesday play. This is a quick thing for me. How was that for you?
Oh, now you've opened a wound.
Ooh.
Some of my best work was done in the early days when the glory of television drama was the Wednesday play. That was really something conceived as something that, you know, a lot of people couldn't go to the theater. It's very expensive. These dramas were original dramas written by well-known playwrights or people who were up and coming, who contributed their talents to the screen, and people stayed in for the Wednesday play. Oh, it's Wednesday night, let's stay in for 9 o'clock show. And I was a part of that experience. I worked with a writer, with writers who became incredibly prominent. Simon Gray was one of them, who subsequently, I did 3 of his dramas, and he then became a very famous playwright, partly because Harold Pinter helped him. And then he wrote his biographies and became a literary person. But I knew him before, when he was just starting. There was another writer called Hugh Whitemore that I worked with. These are people who were up and coming and ended up as very prominent writers. But I would say 2 things about the Wednesday play. For instance, I did 2 that today probably wouldn't even get commissioned. One of them was called Sleeping Dog, about a white colonial couple that come back from Africa, having done their stint of ruling the hordes, and they come to England. This is set in the 60s. So in those days, hotels in Kensington used to put up with people who waited. They were all colonels and their wives, while they were looking for their houses in Surrey to retire to. And this couple turns up from Africa, and they're staying in a hotel, the Lord and Lady, whatever their names were. And he sees his wife talking to the black bartender at the hotel. And as they're there for some time, she's a bit of an alcoholic, so she goes there for a regular tipple. And he keeps watching and realizing that, thinking there may be something going on. What does he do? They finally buy their cottage in Surrey. He invites the black bartender to visit, brings him to the new home where he's seen to it that there's a cellar, takes the black guy down into the cellar, and when the guy's unaware, strangleholds him, forces him to the ground, locks him in a dog collar, chained to the wall, and the rest of the drama is about taunting the black man.
Oh, wow.
The white man taunting the black man and subjugating him into a state of animalism. Now, you wouldn't be able to commission that today.
Yeah.
This drama was called Sleeping Dog. It was very, very relevant to the time of Black prejudice.
Sounds powerful.
I wish I could still have it to show that we haven't changed at all. I know that Steve McQueen is now showing all these shows on BBC, you know, about Black Lives Matter. It's nothing compared to that particular drama. I think people today would be absolutely furious. But I had a fantastic cast. I had a wonderful Senegalese actor called Johnny Seka, who played the... I said to him, are you okay with this? Playing this? I mean, for me to direct him, being subjugated with a dog collar around his neck, chained to a wall. He said, Waris, I'm actually acting out my ancestors.
Yeah.
It's, for me, it's a kind of, you know, exorcism. So I really saw the point of why he was doing it.
That's quite powerful.
That was one piece that I wanted to tell you. The other one that I did, which way ahead of its time, about a married schoolmaster whose wife is 7 months pregnant, teaches a Catholic kid who was very ultra-Catholic with his widowed mother. He comes to do extra classes to teach the boy extra maths, I think, to that boy's house. And in the process, seduces the kid, destroying the boy.
Yeah.
And his wife is 7 months, the man's wife is 7 months pregnant. Imagine that. Could we do that now without any kind of repercussion? The whole idea of pedophilia, a respectable man who on the surface is got everything going for him, a wife who begins to suspect that something's wrong. She's 7 months pregnant. And the boy, and I had a fabulous cast again, you know, Simon Ward, who ultimately ended up playing Winston, the young Winston on film. Simon played the young boy, and that's been wiped. Can you imagine what I could have done with those 2 programs?
Yeah.
And why was it wiped? Because the BBC was saving their tapes to record yet another rugby match over it. You know?
That's opening the... I'm quite a big historian in the terms of finding the missing tapes and all the like that. Like for me, Marco Polo is actually one of my favorite.
Well, of course, that is
period.
still to be found, and that is another loss. My God, after the struggles that we did on the first 4, by the time we got to Marco Polo, there was more money. There was a success factor behind it. We even got a radio.
Visually, it looks stunning from the telesnaps.
It was stunning, and I'm very proud of it. And we got a cover for Radio Times, which at that time was much sought after. And visually, Barry Newbury's sets, and we were still in Studio D, Lime Grove. Don't forget, we had not got through the luxury of the television center. And I'm very proud of Marco Polo. And unfortunately, all we've got are still photographs and voice recordings. It upsets me terribly to talk about it, actually. So don't talk to me about white shows, because I could go on about it forever. Those were some of the best work I've ever done in my career. And I've lost it. I've lost them. And there are still 1 or 2 existing, by the way, I might add very rapidly. One of them, I don't know whether you know this, but I had 2 years ago, the NFT had a season of my television work at the National Film Theatre Cinema, and what I had was most of my best television work, which still exists. So amongst them, Passage to India, which is black and white. I'm very proud of it. E.M. Forster, and I might add, people who've seen both the David Lean's big epic and mine, they all said they preferred mine, because the other one was like a travelogue. I said, I'd be more euphemistic. I said his was a big orchestra, mine was a quartet. So it's a question of comparing the two. That was one that still exists. It's in the archives. It can be seen at Mediatek at the BFI. Another Wednesday play was salvaged called The Connoisseur, which again, it's about written by an ex-Etonian, by the way, who hated Eton. And he wrote a play about corruption amongst boys. To put it bluntly, young boys being buggered by senior boys. And one of the boys reports it to his father, who, by the way, is the school chaplain in the school. And his father is now having the problem of deciding whether to go with what his son has told him or to keep quiet. Interesting drama, don't you think? About hypocrisy in highly paid, privileged schools. So that was a play that still exists, by the way, The Connoisseur. I've got that.
Wonderful.
Another one, Chips with Everything, Arnold Wesker's story about national service, about boys from all sorts of backgrounds being brought together and made to go through the horrors of becoming army types, military types, sort of subjugated in their individuality to becoming something they weren't. I've got Chips with Everything. So, and mustn't forget, and it's in color. Hedda Gabler, my production, Ibsen, with Janet Suzman, Ian McKellen, Jane Asher, and Tom Bell. And I'm very proud of it. There are many productions of Hedda Gabler have been made, but I can tell you this. Mine is top of the heap.
That's what we like to hear, absolutely.
And it's in color, so it can still be transmitted.
Fantastic.
So those are my television works. I mean, that's what you asked me for, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we could launch into films as well, and I don't know whether that's relevant.
I think it's pretty relevant. If you have a particular favorite film you've done or something you're the most
films.
proud of.
I mean, I've only done 5 over my career. No, but the most recent, by the way, I'll go backwards in time. The most recent was actually about a boy with osteoporosis, an Indian. It's set in Bombay in the 60s. He is disabled. He's got his brittle bone, and he belongs to a group of people called the Parsis, who during the British Raj, they were very prominent, very wealthy. They created the wealth and spectacular nature of places like Bombay. Once the British left, their careers and their lives declined because they intermarried a lot. They didn't marry outside their religion. There are Zoroastrians came in years and years and years ago from Persia, escaping persecution. Anyway, the Parsis This is a Parsi boy, disabled, living in a flat with his parents, and confined to a wheelchair. So he's already an outsider in the overall pattern of Indian life, can't go out. He's disabled, he's gay, and he's a Parsi. There are 3 counts against him, and it's about a survival. And he meets and he has a love affair with an able-bodied guy. And I felt incredibly proud of doing it because it was adapted from a book by the author into a screenplay, and I couldn't find any way to cast it because it starts at the age of 8 and goes on to 18. He's in a wheelchair. And in the end, I resorted to casting the writer in the lead.
Really?
He'd never acted before in his life. And it starts off with you thinking, oh my God, is this guy really 8? Because he obviously doesn't look it. But by the time the film finishes, you're totally on his side.
Yeah.
And I got my cue from a film called Tin Drum, where the kid doesn't grow up. He just stays as a boy in a body, but grows up as an adult. And there's the most incredible scene in that film. It's a German movie, of course. America could never make it. You see an 8-year-old adult having sex with a 40-year-old woman. Now, that is a stretch. That's in his film. But when I said, if he can get away with that, I can get away with casting this person as an 8-year-old growing up to be 18, and it's accepted because he's in a wheelchair all the time. Anyway, so we've done that, and that was made by the BBC, by the way. Didn't get much distribution. We were way ahead of our time. Today, disability is now regarded with some awe. At that time, it was not regarded in the same way. In fact, when I screened it in America, which is very conscious of disability, and anything ugly to them is, oh my God, no. And in my situation, I had the 2 guys, the disabled kid who is lying on his back and the other one falls on top of him by mistake and says, are you all right? And he says, yes, I'm fine. He says, are you sure I haven't broken anything? And he hasn't, thank God. Because when we were shooting it, actually, I was terrified. I could only do 1 take on it because if that guy had fallen on him more than once and broken any bones, I would have been liable. Anyway, we managed to get through it in 1 take, and the character kisses him. They kiss each other deeply. You should have heard the gasp from the American audience. It wasn't it was one of absolute horror. A disabled person should be kissing an able-bodied person. Was like, oh my God. The only other person who achieved that was Daniel Day-Lewis when he played a cripple. But the fact was that was an able-bodied actor. It wasn't somebody who really was disabled. Anyway, that's an achievement. Then I'm very proud of various things. I've done historical epics. I did the remake. Actually, I did the continuation of Henry VIII and his 6 wives because it was a huge success on television. I was asked to do the feature, and I said, no, I wouldn't, unless I could do an original approach on it. And actually, we took a different point of view of why Henry behaved the way he did and why there were so many people who suffered under him. I did with that, and I'm very proud of it. I did a horror film with Shirley MacLaine called The Possession of Gerald Delaney. And it was compared to The Exorcist. It's about, but I didn't see it just as a horror film. I actually saw it as a story about a rich woman's conflict with the poverty of New York.
That was 1972.
Yes,
I think that was
something like that. The possession, and it's about a woman finding out about herself, that her complacent life, doing all sorts of, going to all sorts of galas and doing all sorts of charity events, and she's still ordering her Puerto Rican maid around until she finds out that in fact she's very vulnerable to what's happening around her. For me, it was a social comment apart from the actual horror element, which is also there. We did an exorcism scene in it, which we actually shot. And the guy who was supposed to be the man controlling it lost control. And we had to stop filming because there was something really outrageous going on the location. So, but we actually managed to finish it, but I won't ever touch a supernatural subject like that again. I won't ever do it again because I felt very strongly about it. So I've done my quota of odd films, including one with Gene Wilder, where he played an Irish horse shoveler. It was called Quacks of Fortune, set in Dublin.
Wow.
Gene Wilder as an Irishman.
I'm sold already.
It's called Quacks of Fortune, has a cousin in the Bronx. And actually, it's quite a cute story. It's again about social disparities. He lives in the really poor working class areas of Dublin. And he falls in love with this American student girl from, she's studying at Trinity. And of course, she's high end.
Yeah.
How do you reach that aspect? I mean, most of my stories have these elements of social disparity, which is what attracts me to them. And I'm glad I'm offered them, actually. They have inbuilt stories and morality behind them.
Yeah. Wow. No,
I always say character-driven stuff is my personal prayer. I think every story should have at its core a good character thing. Probably why I prefer earlier Doctor Who as opposed to some of the new stuff. Not that I'm attacking the new show for that.
Right. Yes.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear that, because a lot of people, when they're offered, the same kind of thing all the time, they class that as typecasting. They don't really like it. It sounds like you actually enjoy getting similar sort of narrative points in your work. Would you say that's accurate?
What? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
Sorry, with the social disparity in a lot of your work, do you
to be typecast as a director?
Well, the reality is, actually, interestingly enough, I actually don't. One of the problems for me is that everyone thinks of me as they can't categorize me. There's such a disparity in my work that they can't say, "Oh, he's very good at action." Actually, I'm not good at action at all. I'm not one of the action directors. Therefore, I'm probably not ever going to be asked to do a Marvel film, because Crash Bang Wallop is not my genre. I deal with human empathy.
Yeah,
that's fine, but it has to be a human element.
Oh, absolutely.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Wonderful stuff. And yeah, I think on that note, really, thank you so much for doing all. Thank you so much for.
I think that's most. Can I just grab the name of that drama about the disabled man with the abled lover, please? Because I'm quite interested in following that.
I didn't give you the name. It's called Sixth Happiness. It was produced by the BBC in conjunction with the BFI. And
yes, I found it.
And Sixth Happiness, I would really encourage you to see it, because I'm very proud of it, and it has a lot in it that is something. It's set in India, in Bombay, and therefore I knew a lot about what I was doing. However, interestingly enough, we recreated that world because it's set mainly in a flat. All of that was recreated by the most wonderful English designer, Lynn Whiteread, her name was. She created in a studio here. And the way she did it was she came to look at flats with me in Bombay. And within the space of 10 days of her research, she managed to come back and recreate what she had witnessed. And she brought back a lot of props with her, like doorbells, doorknobs, light switches that you can't get anywhere else. And she recreated that apartment. People seeing it absolutely think we shot the whole thing in India. We didn't. We only had 10 days in India for exteriors. The rest were all in London. And I'm very proud of it, because a lot of British Asians were in it. People who are now very well known, like Nina Wadia plays her sister, his sister. Some of the people who are Indra Verma plays the girl in his life. I mean, they're all now doing awfully well, but in the time I cast them, they were hardly known. Because one of the things I will tell you about, I also did a Kipling series, of which there's some that exist, and I'm sorry to say I'm not happy, because in those days when I was doing Kipling, all set in Victorian India, there were no Indian characters to cast. So every single Indian is played by a Caucasian browned up. And you've got people with terrible accents, which now you want to squirm at.
Yeah.
Warren Mitchell played an Indian. I mean,
it ends up being unintentionally comedic.
It's now comedic, but I can't. They wanted to, there's going to be a festival of my TV movies shown in Birmingham in November, by the way. I'm going to the Birmingham Film Festival.
Ooh.
They will show an extract of one of the Kiplings. I said, for God's sake, please don't.
Yeah.
He's showing that in Birmingham now with a Caucasian cast, browned up, playing Indians. I'll be laughed out of the auditorium. I don't want to be a part of it. So I've told them, please don't use it. Use anything else that you can find, but don't use that. They were saying that we can't find some of your best work. It's all been wiped. I said, no, there's some that's still available. So I guided them to some of the stuff that I've just mentioned that still exists.
Yeah, wow.
It's funny you mention that. I'm friends with the bloke who runs Birmingham Film Festival. I'll have to make sure that we get some tickets to that.
Yes, it's in November this year. In the Birmingham Film in November. There's a date I've got.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely.
Sounds wonderful. I think that's a fair place to actually give that some promotion.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah,
you mention it.
Oh yes. And at the very end of these, you spoke a bit about stuff that you're producing right now. Is there anything particularly you'd like to promote now?
Is there anything we should be on the lookout for right now?
About what I'm doing?
Yes, yeah.
To look out for. Oh, well, I don't want to give away too much in case it doesn't happen. But we're dealing with another controversial story. It's set in America. It's about Catholicism. It's about the corruption, not of minors, but the other way around. Adult who is actually accused by a person younger. And there's a law, of course, that defends.
I'm intrigued.
And so it's a controversial one. It's also involves sexual conversion, which I'm very against. So there's a number of themes involved in one movie, but I won't go into it in detail beyond that.
Yeah, of course.
I'll keep an eye out for that.
No worries at all. And once again, on that note, thank you so much for taking so much time with us today. And
Waris, it has been an absolute honor. Thank you very much.